At my uncle's anniversary celebration, my father stood up in front of 50 family members and announced that I'd been completely cut from my grandfather's will. He said it with such satisfaction, like he'd been waiting years for this moment to humiliate me. The worst part, everyone just sat there nodding, like they'd all agreed I didn't deserve a single penny of the family fortune. But then something happened that changed everything. A truth about my grandfather's real wishes came out, one that no one, especially my father, saw coming. Suddenly, the same people who were whispering about my poor life choices were scrambling to get back on my good side. But I had just one response before I walked out of that mansion forever. So tell me, was I wrong for exposing my father's lies and claiming what was rightfully mine, even if it destroyed our family forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hello everyone, my name is Harper Lane, and I'm 29 years old. I work as a community outreach coordinator for nonprofit organizations here in Millbrook, helping families access resources and support services they desperately need. Looking at my life, most people would probably assume I come from a humble working-class background. They'd think my passion for helping others stems from personal experience with struggle, and that my family must be proud of my dedication to making a difference in people's lives. But the truth is completely different from what people imagine. I come from one of the wealthiest families in Blackwood Hills. My grandfather, Alden Finch, built a real estate empire worth over $50 million before he passed away 2 years ago. My father, Wilson Wild, inherited the family business and has been running Ivory Tower Investment Group ever since, continuing to expand our family's already massive fortune. Yet despite growing up surrounded by luxury and privilege, my family has never respected the path I've chosen. For years, they've seen my nonprofit work as nothing more than a phase, a young woman's misguided attempt to rebel against her privileged upbringing, before eventually coming to her senses and joining the family business. Not because my work isn't meaningful or successful, but because my father and the rest of my relatives have never been able to understand why someone with access to millions would choose to make $45,000 a year, helping families find housing assistance and job training programs. They assume I'm wasting my education, my connections, and my potential. Every family gathering becomes an opportunity for them to remind me that I'm throwing away a fortune to play social worker, as my father likes to put it. To them, the only person who truly understands the value of money and success is my older brother Tristan. He's 3 years older than me, graduated from Wharton with an MBA, and stepped seamlessly into the family business as vice president of development. He drives a Porsche, owns a penthouse downtown, and the family celebrates every deal he closes like it's a personal victory for all of us. And me, even after spending 5 years building successful community programs that have helped over 2,000 families find stable housing and employment, I'm still seen as the family disappointment who refuses to grow up and accept her responsibilities. The irony is that while they see my work as worthless, I've never needed their money anyway. My grandfather, before he died, always told me he was proud of my choices. He said that real wealth wasn't just about accumulating money, but about using whatever advantages you have to lift others up. Those conversations with him were some of the most meaningful moments of my life. But after his death, everything changed. The family dynamic shifted, and suddenly my father became the sole voice of authority when it came to family values and expectations. Without my grandfather's support and understanding, I became even more isolated from the rest of my relatives. Even though I rarely attend family events anymore, I still maintain some connection with them. I send flowers on birthdays, show up for major celebrations when I can, and try to keep the relationship civil even when they can't understand my choices. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that my grandfather had been watching everything. He'd been paying attention to how the family treated me, how they valued money over character, and how they measured worth by bank account balances, rather than the impact someone makes in the world. And he'd been planning something that would change everything. 3 weeks ago, my uncle Kelvin Shaw called to invite me to his 25th wedding anniversary celebration. It was going to be held at Thornfield Estate, my grandfather's former mansion that now belongs to my father. Kelvin mentioned that it would be a big celebration, with extended family coming from across the country. I almost said no. These family gatherings had become increasingly uncomfortable over the years, with more and more pointed comments about my wasted potential and misguided priorities. But something in my uncle's voice made me reconsider. He seemed genuinely excited about the celebration, and he specifically mentioned that there would be some important family business discussed. I thought maybe, finally there would be an opportunity for the family to come together and focus on celebrating love and commitment, rather than arguing about career choices and life paths. Maybe this anniversary celebration could be a chance for healing and understanding. I couldn't have been more wrong. What happened at that anniversary party wasn't just another family argument or uncomfortable conversation about my career choices. It was a deliberate, calculated humiliation designed to cut me off from the family forever. But what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my grandfather had been planning for exactly this kind of moment. He'd been preparing for the day when the family's true colors would be revealed, when their treatment of me would finally cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And on that night, in front of 50 family members and friends, the truth about my grandfather's real wishes would finally come to light. Let me tell you a bit more about who I am, and what I've built outside of my family's world, because understanding my actual life is crucial to understanding why what happened at that anniversary party was so devastating, and why what came after was so satisfying. For the past 5 years, I've been working at Rosewood Community Center, which serves 3 of the most underserved neighborhoods in Millbrook. When I started there, I was just one of many volunteers helping with their food distribution program on weekends. But I quickly realized that while giving people groceries once a week was helpful, it wasn't addressing the root causes of why families were struggling in the first place. So I developed what we call the Pathway program, a comprehensive support system that helps families not just survive their current crisis, but build sustainable paths to stability. We help with everything from job training and resume writing to financial literacy and housing assistance. We connect people with mental health resources, help kids get school supplies and tutoring, and provide a network of support that goes far beyond what traditional charity programs offer. The program started with just 12 families. Today we serve over 400 families across the county, and we have a waiting list of people who want to participate. We've helped 89% of our participants find stable employment within 6 months, and 67% have been able to move into better housing situations within a year. These aren't just statistics to me, these are real people whose lives have genuinely improved. Like Maria Santos, who came to us after losing her job and facing eviction with 3 kids. Through our program, she completed her GED, got certified as a medical assistant, and now works at Millbrook General Hospital with full benefits. She bought her first house last year. Or James Mitchell, a military veteran who was struggling with PTSD and couldn't hold down steady work. Our program connected him with specialized counseling services and helped him start his own landscaping business. He now employs 4 other veterans and donates services to senior citizens in the community. These stories, these transformations, these real impacts on real families, this is what gives my life meaning. This is what I'm proud of when I go to bed at night. But here's what my family has never understood. I didn't choose this work despite my privileged background. I chose it because of my privileged background. Growing up with every advantage, every opportunity, every door already open, I learned that real satisfaction doesn't come from accumulating more advantages for yourself. It comes from using the advantages you have to create opportunities for others. My grandfather understood this. Alden Finch didn't just build wealth, he built a legacy of community involvement. Before he focused full-time on real estate development, he spent 15 years as a public school teacher. Even after he became successful, he quietly funded scholarship programs, donated to local food banks, and made sure his business practices benefited the communities where he worked. He used to tell me stories about growing up poor, about what it felt like to worry about whether there would be enough food for dinner, or whether his family would be able to pay rent that month. He said that success wasn't about forgetting where you came from, it was about remembering and making sure others didn't have to suffer the same way. Those conversations shaped everything about how I see the world. When I told him I wanted to work in nonprofit organizations, he didn't try to talk me out of it. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about my goals, my strategies, and how I planned to measure success. He treated my work with the same seriousness and respect that he gave to million-dollar business deals. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My father, on the other hand, has never been able to see past the salary difference. To Wilson Wild, the fact that I make $45,000 a year, while Tristan makes $300,000, is all the evidence he needs that I've made wrong choices. The fact that I drive a 5-year-old Honda Civic while my brother drives a new Porsche every year is proof that I'm wasting my potential. He's never asked me about the families we've helped. He's never inquired about the programs I've developed or the impact we're making in the community. He's never shown any curiosity about what my day-to-day work actually involves or why I find it fulfilling. To him, I'm just his daughter who could be making 10 times more money if she would just stop being stubborn and join the family business. This fundamental misunderstanding of who I am and what drives me has created a gulf between us that seems to widen every year. At family gatherings, while everyone celebrates Tristan's latest business success, my work gets mentioned, if it's mentioned at all, with a tone of bemused tolerance, like they're discussing a teenager's hobby that they hope she'll eventually outgrow. But the thing is, I don't need their approval to know that my work has value. I see the impact every day. I get thank you cards from families who've found stable housing. I get invited to graduation parties for kids who stayed in school because our program provided tutoring and support. I get updates from program participants who've been promoted at work or started their own businesses. This work has given me a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I genuinely don't think I could find anywhere else, regardless of how much money was involved. My grandfather knew this about me. In our last conversation before he died, he held my hand and said, "Harper, you've found something that money can't buy. The knowledge that your life matters to other people. Don't ever let anyone convince you to trade that for anything, no matter how much they offer." At the time, I thought he was just giving me general life advice, encouraging me to stay strong in the face of family pressure. I had no idea he was also giving me a hint about plans he'd already set in motion, plans that would ensure I'd have the financial security to continue my work without ever having to compromise my values for my family's approval. To understand how everything exploded at that anniversary party, you need to know the history of my family's relationship with money, power, and control. Because what happened wasn't just about me or my career choices, it was the culmination of years of toxic family dynamics that my grandfather had been watching and quietly documenting. I grew up in Blackwood Hills, where every house costs at least $2 million, and every family has at least 3 cars in their circular driveway. Our house was a sprawling colonial mansion with 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a swimming pool, and a tennis court. My bedroom alone was bigger than most people's entire apartments. But here's the thing about growing up with that much wealth, it shapes your perspective on everything. Often in ways you don't even realize until you're an adult. My father, Wilson Wilde, inherited his position as head of the family business when my grandfather decided to step back from day-to-day operations about 10 years ago. But Wilson didn't just inherit a company, he inherited an attitude about what success looks like and how family loyalty should work. To my father, family loyalty means falling in line with family expectations. It means using your education, your connections, and your advantages to accumulate more wealth and status for the family name. It means understanding that individual desires come second to family reputation and financial growth. This philosophy worked perfectly for my brother Tristan. From the time he was 15 years old, he knew he wanted to join the family business. He studied business in college, got his MBA from the most prestigious program he could get into, and stepped seamlessly into a role at Ivory Tower Investment Group, where he could learn the business from the ground up. Tristan genuinely loves what he does. He gets excited about property development deals, he enjoys negotiating contracts, and he has a natural talent for identifying profitable investment opportunities. The family business isn't just his career, it's his passion, and his success there feels authentic and earned. For me, it was different from the very beginning. When I was 16, my father started bringing me to take your daughter to work days that stretched into entire summer internships at the company. He wanted me to see how deals were made, how properties were developed, how wealth was built and managed. And I did see all of that. But I also saw things that made me uncomfortable. I saw how the company's development projects sometimes displaced families who had been living in affordable housing for generations. I watched my father and his team celebrate profit margins, while never discussing what happened to the communities that were transformed by their projects. I remember one specific project, where Ivory Tower Investment Group bought a row of older apartment buildings in a working-class neighborhood. The plan was to renovate them into luxury condos that would sell for 5 times the price of the original apartments. During one of the planning meetings, I asked what would happen to the families who were currently living in those apartments. My father looked at me like I'd asked a question that didn't make sense. "They'll find somewhere else to live," he said. "That's not our concern. Our job is to maximize the value of the property." But I kept thinking about those families. Where would they find somewhere else to live that they could afford? How many kids would have to change schools? How many people would have longer commutes to work or lose access to community resources they relied on? These questions didn't make me anti-business or anti-development. They made me interested in finding ways to create economic growth that also supported the people who were already part of a community. When I brought these ideas to my father, suggesting that maybe the company could include affordable housing units in their developments, or partner with social service organizations to help displaced families find new housing, he was dismissive. "Harper," he said, "business is business. We're not a charity. If you want to help people, write them a check on your own time." That conversation happened when I was 17 years old, and it was the moment I realized that the family business would never be the right fit for me. Not because I couldn't handle the work or didn't understand the finances, but because I couldn't accept the idea that profitable business and social responsibility had to be mutually exclusive. My grandfather, interestingly, had a different perspective. Alden Finch had built his wealth through real estate development, just like my father was doing. But he'd done it in an era when developers were expected to be more involved in their communities. When business success was measured not just by profit margins, but by the positive impact you had on the places where you worked. He told me stories about developments he'd worked on, where they included community centers, affordable housing units, and public spaces that benefited everyone in the neighborhood, not just the wealthy buyers. He talked about the pride he felt when former tenants would stop him on the street years later to thank him for helping them transition to new housing, or connecting them with job opportunities. Building wealth doesn't have to mean tearing down communities, he told me. The best business deals are the ones where everyone wins. These conversations with my grandfather gave me a framework for understanding how I could use my advantages and education to make a positive impact without abandoning business principles entirely. They helped me see that my interest in social work and community development wasn't naive or impractical, it was just a different approach to solving problems and creating value. But my father never saw it that way. To him, my interest in nonprofit work was evidence that I was too soft, too idealistic, too influenced by liberal college professors who had filled my head with unrealistic ideas about how the world should work. The tension between us really escalated when I graduated from college and announced that I was taking a job at Rosewood Community Center instead of joining the family business. I remember that conversation clearly. We were sitting in his home office, surrounded by awards and photos commemorating various business deals and real estate developments. I'd prepared a whole presentation about my career plans, my goals for community work, and how I thought I could make a meaningful contribution to society. He listened for about 5 minutes before cutting me off. "This is ridiculous, Harper. You have a degree from one of the best universities in the country. You have connections that most people would kill for. You have the opportunity to step into a leadership role at a multi-million-dollar company. And you want to throw all of that away to work at some nonprofit for what, $30,000 a year?" I tried to explain that it wasn't about the money, that I'd found something I was passionate about, that I wanted to use my advantages to help people who hadn't had the same opportunities I'd had. He shook his head. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that destroys family wealth. One generation builds it, the next generation maintains it, and the third generation gives it all away to feel good about themselves." That was 6 years ago. And while our relationship has remained civil on the surface, there's been an underlying current of disappointment and disapproval that colors every interaction we have. What I didn't know was that my grandfather had been watching all of this play out. He'd been listening to the family conversations about my phase and my wasted potential. He'd been observing how my father treated my career choices compared to how he celebrated Tristan's success, and apparently he'd been making plans. Over the past 5 years, while my family continued to see my career as a temporary detour from my real responsibilities, I was building something that would prove to have more lasting impact than any of them imagined. The first year at Rosewood Community Center was honestly overwhelming. I came in with a lot of enthusiasm and theoretical knowledge from my sociology and business courses, but very little practical experience with the daily realities of poverty, housing instability, and systemic barriers that keep families trapped in cycles of crisis. I remember my first week, I met a woman named Patricia Chen, who came in looking for help with her electric bill. She was working 2 part-time jobs, neither of which offered benefits, and she was 3 months behind on her utilities. Her 8-year-old daughter had asthma, and Patricia was terrified that if they lost electricity, she wouldn't be able to run the air purifier that helped her daughter breathe at night. I spent hours on the phone with the electric company, negotiating a payment plan and trying to access emergency assistance funds. We eventually got her current on her bills, but I realized that in 3 months, she'd probably be right back in the same situation because nothing had changed about her underlying circumstances. That's when I started to understand that effective social work isn't just about putting band-aids on immediate crises. It's about helping people build systems and skills that prevent those crises from happening over and over again. So I started working with Patricia on a longer-term plan. We looked at her budget together and identified ways to reduce expenses. I helped her apply for job training programs that would qualify her for positions with better pay and benefits. We connected her daughter with free after-school programs that included homework help and meals, which saved Patricia money on childcare and groceries. 6 months later, Patricia had completed a medical billing certification program and gotten a full-time job at a local clinic with health insurance and paid time off. She was able to move into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, and her daughter's asthma improved dramatically once they were no longer living in a building with mold problems. This experience taught me that sustainable change requires addressing multiple factors at once: employment, housing, healthcare, education, financial literacy, and emotional support. You can't just fix one piece and expect everything else to fall into place. This insight became the foundation for the Pathway program. Instead of offering families individual services in isolation, we created a comprehensive support system that addressed all the major factors that contribute to family stability. Developing this program required skills I'd never learned in college. I had to understand government assistance programs, housing regulations, employment law, mental health resources, and educational systems. I had to learn how to write grants, manage budgets, coordinate with other organizations, and measure outcomes in ways that would satisfy both participants and funders. But most importantly, I had to learn how to listen to families and understand what they actually needed, rather than what I thought they needed based on my assumptions about poverty and social services. This meant spending time in neighborhoods I'd never visited before, having conversations with people whose life experiences were completely different from mine, and constantly challenging my own biases and preconceptions about how social problems should be solved. My family, meanwhile, remained completely disconnected from this work and this growth. At family dinners, when they asked about my job, I'd try to share stories about families we'd helped or programs we'd developed. But the conversations always seemed to drift back to questions about when I was going to get serious about my career and join the family business. My father would make comments like, "That's nice, honey, but you could do so much more good if you had real resources to work with. Think about how many families you could help if you were earning a real salary and making real donations instead of volunteering your time for pocket change." My mother, Amelia, usually tried to be more supportive, but even her encouragement was tinged with worry. "I just want to make sure you're thinking about your future," she'd say. "This work is very noble, but what about when you want to start a family? What about retirement planning? What about building some financial security?" These conversations were frustrating because they were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what I was doing, and why I was doing. My family saw my work as charity, something nice that rich people do with their spare time and money to feel good about themselves. They didn't understand that I was building professional expertise, developing programs, managing budgets, and creating measurable impact in my community. They also didn't understand that I wasn't sacrificing my financial future. While my salary at Rosewood was modest, I was living well within my means, saving money, and building a career in a field with real growth opportunities. I'd already been promoted twice, and I was being recruited by larger nonprofits, and even government agencies that had heard about the success of our programs. But most importantly, they didn't understand that I was genuinely happy and fulfilled in ways that had nothing to do with money or status. The work was challenging, and sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also incredibly rewarding. I got to see families transform their lives in real time. I got to develop innovative solutions to complex problems. I got to work with dedicated, passionate people who shared my values and commitment to social justice. I was learning and growing every day, building skills and relationships that would serve me for the rest of my career. I was making a difference in my community in ways that felt authentic and sustainable. During this time, the person who understood and supported my work most was my grandfather. Even as his health began to decline, he remained genuinely interested in what I was doing, and proud of what I was accomplishing. He would ask detailed questions about our programs, our participants, and our outcomes. He wanted to know about our challenges and how we were working to overcome them. He celebrated our successes and offered thoughtful advice when we encountered obstacles. Sometimes he would make anonymous donations to support specific families or programs. I didn't find out about most of these until much later, because he always insisted that the donations not be traced back to him. "I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to buy my way into heaven," he'd joke. "I just want to help good people do good work." In our last conversation before he died, we talked about the expansion plans I was developing for the Pathway program. I'd been invited to present our model to a consortium of nonprofits and government agencies who were interested in implementing similar programs in other communities. "You've found your calling," he told me, "and you've built something that will outlive you. That's the real measure of a successful career." At the time, I thought he was just being encouraging. I had no idea that he'd been making concrete plans to ensure that I'd have the resources to continue and expand my work for decades to come. Those plans would remain secret for almost 2 years after his death. But they were about to change everything. The phone call from my uncle Kelvin came on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was in the middle of a budget meeting with our program directors. I almost didn't answer because we were deep into planning for next year's expansion, but something made me glance at the caller ID. "Harper," Kelvin's voice was unusually excited. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, but I have something wonderful to share with you." Kelvin Shaw had always been my favorite uncle. He was my mother's younger brother, and unlike most of my family, he'd never made me feel bad about my career choices. He worked as a high school principal and understood the value of public service work, even if he didn't always understand exactly what I did at the community center. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping out of the meeting room to give him my full attention. "Well, you know, Natalie and I are celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary next month," he said. "We were originally planning something small, just immediate family, but we've decided to make it a bigger celebration. We want to have it at Thornfield Estate, your grandfather's old place." I felt a little twist in my stomach at the mention of Thornfield Estate. The mansion had been my grandfather's pride and joy, but since his death, my father had been using it primarily for business entertaining and family events that felt more like corporate functions than personal celebrations. "That sounds lovely," I said, though I was already dreading the idea of another family gathering where I'd have to defend my life choices to relatives who fundamentally didn't understand them. "Here's the thing," Kelvin continued, and his voice took on a more serious tone. "We specifically want you to be there. All of you kids, you Tristan, your cousins. This isn't just about celebrating our marriage, it's about bringing the family together and talking about some important things." Something in his voice made me pay closer attention. Important things. Well, I can't say too much over the phone, but there are some family matters that need to be discussed, some things that have been postponed since your grandfather's death. Your father thinks it's time to address them. My heart started beating faster. Family matters that had been postponed since grandfather's death could only mean one thing: his will and the distribution of his estate. When my grandfather died 2 years ago, there had been surprisingly little discussion about inheritance. My father had simply announced that he was inheriting the business and the main family assets, which everyone had expected. Tristan was set to inherit his share when he reached certain milestones in the company. The rest of us, myself, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, had been told that specific bequests would be handled at the appropriate time. I'd assumed this meant when my father was ready to retire, or when family circumstances changed in some way. I'd honestly tried not to think about it too much, because I didn't want my family to think I was working at the community center while secretly waiting for an inheritance to bail me out. But now, apparently, that appropriate time had arrived. "Will everyone be there?" I asked. "Oh yes, the whole family. Your parents, Tristan and his wife, all your cousins, your aunts and uncles. Maybe 50 people total when you include spouses and adult grandkids. Your father wants to make sure everyone hears this information at the same time." The way he said it made me nervous. Why would my father want 50 people to hear inheritance information simultaneously? Why couldn't these discussions happen in smaller groups or private conversations? "And you think I should be there for this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Harper, honey, of course you should be there. You're part of this family. Whatever gets discussed, it affects you too." But something in his tone suggested that he wasn't entirely confident about how those effects would play out. We talked for a few more minutes about the details: date, time, dress code, formal naturally, and whether I needed a +1. I didn't. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window and trying to figure out why this conversation had left me feeling so uneasy. Over the next few weeks, as the anniversary party approached, my anxiety only got worse. Family members kept calling to confirm that I was coming, which seemed odd for what was supposed to be a celebration. My mother called 3 times to make sure I had appropriate formal wear. Tristan called to ask if I needed a ride, which was completely out of character for him. Most strangely, my father called to personally confirm my attendance, and to tell me how important it was that I be there for this special family occasion. "I know these big family gatherings aren't really your thing anymore," he said, "but this one is different. This one is about family legacy and making sure everyone understands their place in the family's future." The phrase "understands their place" sent a chill down my spine. In my family's vocabulary, that usually meant someone was about to be put in their place, and it was rarely pleasant. 3 days before the party, I was having lunch with my colleague Jennifer Martinez, who'd become not just a work partner but a close friend over the years. I found myself telling her about my growing dread about the anniversary celebration. "It just feels like something bad is going to happen," I said, "like this isn't really about celebrating Kelvin and Natalie's marriage. It feels like an ambush." Jennifer had heard enough stories about my family dynamics over the years to understand why I might feel that way. "What's the worst-case scenario?" she asked. I thought about it. "I guess my father announces that I'm not getting any inheritance because I've disappointed the family with my career choices. He humiliates me in front of 50 relatives and makes it clear that unless I join the family business, I'm basically being cut off financially." Even saying it out loud, it sounded dramatic and paranoid. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like exactly the kind of power play my father would orchestrate. "And if that happens," Jennifer asked, "how do you feel about it?" I realized I wasn't sure. On one hand, I'd never planned my life around expecting an inheritance. I was financially independent, passionate about my work, and proud of what I'd built on my own. On the other hand, being publicly rejected by my family in such a definitive way would be emotionally devastating, regardless of the financial implications. "I guess I'd survive," I said, "but it would hurt, and it would probably be the end of any real relationship with my family." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "Well, maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe it's time for you to know exactly where you stand with them, one way or the other. At least then you can stop wondering, and stop trying to win approval from people who might never give it." She was right, of course. The uncertainty and tension had been exhausting for years. Maybe a definitive break would actually be a relief, even if it was painful in the short term. The night before the anniversary party, I'd barely slept. I kept playing out different scenarios in my head, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. But as it turned out, I couldn't have prepared myself for what actually happened. Because what unfolded at Thornfield Estate that night was bigger than anything I could have imagined, and it would change not just my life, but my entire family's understanding of who my grandfather really was, and what he'd really wanted for all of us. The night of Kelvin and Natalie's anniversary celebration, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror for 20 minutes, adjusting and readjusting my black cocktail dress. It wasn't that I was particularly concerned about my appearance. It was that I was trying to delay the inevitable moment when I'd have to walk into Thornfield Estate and face whatever my father had planned. The mansion looked exactly as I remembered from my grandfather's funeral 2 years ago. Every window blazed with warm light, the circular driveway was lined with luxury cars, and you could hear the soft murmur of conversation and classical music drifting from the main ballroom. On the surface, it looked like the perfect elegant family celebration. But as I walked up the stone steps to the front entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. The first hour of the party proceeded exactly as I'd expected. Relatives I hadn't seen in months greeted me with polite hugs and immediate questions about whether I was still doing that social work thing. Cousins updated me on their latest promotions, home purchases, and vacation plans. Everyone was dressed impeccably, drinks were flowing freely, and the conversation was the usual mix of family gossip and business talk. I found myself gravitating toward Kelvin and Natalie, partly because they were the guests of honor, but mostly because they were the only people in the room who didn't make me feel like I needed to defend my life choices. We talked about their anniversary trip to Europe, Natalie's recent promotion at the bank, where she worked, and Kelvin's plans for retirement from his principal job. I have to say, Kelvin told me as we stood near the elegant French doors, overlooking my grandfather's former gardens, "Your grandfather would have loved seeing the family together like this. He always said these big gatherings were when the family felt most like a family." Something about the way he said it made me look at him more closely. "Uncle Kelvin, what exactly is going to happen tonight? You mentioned family business, but everyone seems to be avoiding the topic." He glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. "To be honest, Harper, I'm not entirely sure. Your father asked me to make sure everyone was here, especially you, but he's been pretty secretive about the details. He just said there were some estate matters that needed to be finalized." Before I could ask what he meant by especially you, my father's voice cut through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention please." The entire ballroom fell silent. Wilson Wilde was standing near the fireplace, champagne glass in hand, with the kind of confident smile that usually preceded his most important business announcements. My mother, Amelia, stood beside him looking elegant but nervous. Tristan was positioned slightly behind them with his wife, Elena, both of them wearing expressions I couldn't quite read. First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, to celebrate Kelvin and Natalie's 25 years of marriage, my father began, raising his glass. It's wonderful to have the whole family together, and I know my father, Harper's grandfather, would have been thrilled to see all of us gathered in his favorite room. There was a round of applause and murmurs of agreement. I noticed that several relatives were looking at me with expressions that seemed almost sympathetic, like they knew something I didn't, and felt sorry for me. But as some of you know, my father continued, tonight isn't just about celebrating Kelvin and Natalie's milestone. It's also about finalizing some important family business that has been pending since my father's death. My stomach dropped. Here it was. When Alden Finch passed away 2 years ago, there were certain aspects of his estate that required time to properly evaluate and distribute. Tonight I'm pleased to announce that process is complete, and everyone will finally know exactly how his legacy will be preserved and honored. He paused dramatically, scanning the room, until his eyes landed directly on me. As most of you know, my father built this family's wealth through careful business decisions, strategic investments, and an unwavering commitment to ensuring that his legacy would continue through future generations who shared his values and vision. I felt my face getting hot. The way he emphasized shared his values and vision, while looking directly at me, was clearly intended to highlight that I didn't qualify. With that in mind, my father continued, I want to be completely transparent about how my father's estate has been distributed, so there are no misunderstandings or false expectations moving forward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an official-looking document. The Ivory Tower Investment Group, along with all primary business assets and properties, has been transferred to myself, and will eventually pass to my son Tristan, who has demonstrated both the capability and commitment necessary to continue building our family's success. Tristan straightened his shoulders and nodded solemnly, as if this were a tremendous responsibility he was reluctantly accepting rather than something he'd been eagerly anticipating his entire life. Various monetary bequests have been made to family members based on their circumstances and their demonstrated commitment to family values, my father continued. Kelvin and Natalie, you'll be receiving a substantial sum for your retirement. Margaret and Thomas, he nodded to my aunt and uncle, your daughter's college funds have been fully endowed. He went through a list of relatives, each receiving generous but not life-changing amounts, enough to feel grateful and included, but not enough to change their dependence on family goodwill. Then his eyes found me again, and his expression grew cold. However, there is one matter that requires special attention, he said, his voice taking on the tone he used for disappointing business announcements. Some family members have chosen paths that fundamentally conflict with the values and vision that built this family's success. The room was completely silent now. I could feel 50 pairs of eyes turning toward me, and I realized with horrifying clarity that this moment had been orchestrated specifically for maximum humiliation. My daughter Harper has spent the last several years deliberately rejecting the opportunities, education, and advantages that this family provided her. Instead of contributing to our legacy, she has chosen to pursue work that, while perhaps well-intentioned, represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how wealth is built and preserved. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This was worse than anything I had imagined. After careful consideration of my father's wishes and the long-term interests of this family, my father continued, I am announcing that Harper Lane Wilde has been removed from any inheritance consideration. She will receive no monetary bequest, no property transfer, and no stake in the family business. The words hit me like physical blows. Removed from inheritance consideration, no monetary bequest, no stake in the family business. This decision, my father said, looking directly at me with something that almost looked like satisfaction, reflects the reality that family wealth must be protected and preserved by family members who understand its value and are committed to its growth. Those who choose to abandon family principles cannot expect to benefit from family resources. I stood there in stunned silence, while murmurs rippled through the room. Some relatives looked uncomfortable, others nodded in agreement, and a few were staring at me with obvious pity. My father raised his champagne glass again. So tonight we celebrate not just Kelvin and Natalie's marriage, but also the security of our family's future in the hands of those who will honor and protect what Alden Finch built. The room erupted in polite applause, but I barely heard it. All I could think was that my father had just publicly disowned me in front of my entire extended family, using my grandfather's legacy as justification. I was trying to figure out how to exit gracefully, or whether I should just leave immediately without saying anything, when there was a sharp knock at the front door. The sound was so unexpected and forceful that the applause died away, and everyone turned toward the entrance hall. Through the ballroom's open doors, we could all see Patrick, my father's longtime butler, walking briskly toward the front door. "Are we expecting someone else?" Kelvin asked my father quietly. My father looked genuinely confused. "No, everyone who was invited is already here." Patrick opened the front door, and a man's voice carried clearly into the ballroom. "Good evening, I'm looking for the Wild family gathering. I'm Orion Stone from Stone, Hayes and Associates. I have urgent business regarding the estate of Alden Finch." The entire room went completely silent. Stone, Hayes and Associates was one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. What could they possibly want at a family anniversary party? "I'm sorry," Patrick's voice drifted back, "but this is a private family celebration. Perhaps you could call tomorrow." "I'm afraid this cannot wait," the lawyer's voice interrupted firmly. "I have been instructed to deliver certain documents tonight, and only tonight. Please inform Wilson Wilde that his father's attorney is here with information about the authentic last will and testament of Alden Finch." I felt the blood drain from my face. Authentic last will and testament. What did that mean? Hadn't we just heard about my grandfather's will? My father's face had gone completely white. "Patrick," he called out sharply, "please escort the gentleman into the study. I'll be right there." But the lawyer's voice carried again. "Mr. Wilde, I'm afraid my instructions are very specific. This information must be delivered in the presence of all family members, particularly Miss Harper Lane Wilde. Is she present this evening?" Every eye in the room turned to me. I felt like I was in some kind of surreal dream. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Excellent," came the reply. "Then I need everyone to remain exactly where you are. What I have to share will affect everyone in this room." My father looked like he was going to be sick. "Now see here," he started to say, moving toward the entrance hall. "This is highly irregular." But Orion Stone was already walking into the ballroom, briefcase in hand, wearing the kind of confident expression that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 50s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room in a single glance. He wore an impeccably tailored dark suit, and carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, setting his briefcase on the coffee table near the fireplace, "I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but I have been entrusted with information that cannot wait any longer." He opened his briefcase and removed a thick legal document bound in blue paper. "My name is Orion Stone, and I was Alden Finch's personal attorney for the last 15 years of his life. More importantly, I was the person he trusted with his true wishes regarding the distribution of his estate." My father stepped forward. "Now hold on just a minute. I have my father's will right here." "Mr. Wilde," Orion Stone interrupted calmly, "what you have is a preliminary document that your father had me prepare as a Finch wanted to see how his family would treat certain family members if they believed those members had no financial inheritance to protect." The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. "The document I hold," Stone continued, "is Alden Finch's true last will and testament, signed, witnessed, and sealed just 6 months before his death. And I can assure you, the contents are quite different from what has been announced here tonight." He looked directly at me with something that might have been a smile. "Miss Wilde, your grandfather left very specific instructions about when and how this information should be revealed. He wanted to ensure that his true wishes would only be disclosed after he could observe how his family treated you when they believed you had no claim to his legacy." I felt like I was going to faint. Around the room, I could see confusion, shock and growing understanding on various faces, as people began to realize what this meant. "According to Mr. Finch's authentic will," Orion Stone announced, opening the document and beginning to read, "the primary beneficiary of his estate, including 70% of all business assets, properties, and investments, is his granddaughter Harper Lane Wilde, in recognition of her commitment to using wealth responsibly, and her dedication to improving the lives of others." The room exploded in gasps, whispers, and shocked exclamations. I gripped the back of a nearby chair to keep from falling over. "The remaining 30%, Stone continued calmly, is to be divided among other family members, with specific bequests based on their character and values, as observed by Mr. Finch during his lifetime." He looked directly at my father, whose face had gone from white to gray. "Mr. Wilson Wilde is to receive a generous pension that will allow him to maintain his current lifestyle, but he is explicitly removed from any leadership role in the family business, which is to be transferred immediately to Miss Harper Wilde. along with full authority to restructure, redirect, or even liquidate the company as she sees fit. I couldn't process what I was hearing. My grandfather had left me 70% of his estate, the family business, authority to restructure everything. Furthermore, Stone continued, Mr. Finch left detailed instructions that anyone who attempted to disinherit, embarrass or manipulate Miss Wilde, based on her career choices, would forfeit any claim to his estate entirely. He looked around the room meaningfully. I believe that condition has just been met. The silence that followed Orion Stone's announcement lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. 50 people stood frozen in absolute shock, trying to process what they'd just heard. Then everything exploded at once. That's impossible, my father shouted, his face now flushed red with anger and panic. I have the original will. I've been managing the estate for 2 years. Orion Stone remained completely calm, like he'd been expecting this reaction. Mr. Wilde, what you have been managing is a trust fund that your father established to maintain family operations, while the true distribution of his estate remained pending. Everything you've been overseeing was essentially borrowed against your daughter's inheritance. My mother suddenly grabbed the back of a chair, looking like she might collapse. Wilson, what is he talking about? You said everything was settled. You said the will was clear. Before my father could answer, Tristan stepped forward, his voice tight with disbelief. This has to be some kind of mistake. There's no way my grandfather would leave the family business to someone who has no experience running a company. Actually, Stone replied, opening another section of the document. Mr. Finch was quite specific about his reasoning. He believed that Miss Wilde's experience in nonprofit management, budget oversight, and community development had given her exactly the skills needed to transform the family business into something more socially responsible and sustainable. He glanced at me with what looked like approval. He was particularly impressed by her pathway program, which he saw as evidence of her ability to create systems that generate both positive social impact and measurable financial returns. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. My grandfather had known about the pathway program. He'd been following my work that closely. Furthermore, Stone continued, Mr. Finch left detailed notes about his concerns regarding the current direction of Ivory Tower Investment Group. He felt the company had become too focused on short-term profits and had lost sight of the community-building principles that originally guided his business philosophy. My father's face was now purple with rage. This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here 2 years after his death with some mysterious document and expect us to believe. Mr. Wilde, Stone interrupted firmly. I understand this is difficult to accept, but everything I'm telling you tonight was planned by your father well in advance. He knew exactly how you would handle his death, exactly how you would treat Harper, and exactly what you would announce at this gathering. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out what looked like a video recording device. In fact, he asked me to record a message explaining his decision, which he wanted Harper to see tonight, after his real will was revealed. The room went completely silent again. A video message from my grandfather, recorded before his death, but meant to be played tonight. Stone looked at me directly. Miss Wilde, your grandfather wanted you to understand, not just what he was leaving you, but why he made these decisions. Would you like to see his message now, or would you prefer to wait until later? I looked around the room at my family's faces. My father looked like he was going to have a heart attack. My mother was crying quietly. Tristan was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, anger and what might have been fear about his own future. My cousins and aunts and uncles were all looking back and forth between me and my father, like they were watching a tennis match. Some seemed sympathetic to my father's shock. Others looked like they were already trying to distance themselves from his earlier announcement about cutting me off. I think, I said, my voice stronger than I expected, everyone should hear whatever my grandfather wanted to say. Stone nodded and set up the recording device on the coffee table. Within moments, my grandfather's face appeared on a small screen, looking exactly as I remembered him from our last conversation 2 years ago. Hello, my dear Harper, his recorded voice said, and I immediately started crying. If you're watching this, it means several things have happened exactly as I expected they would. He paused, and even through the recording, his eyes seemed to find mine across the room. First, it means that your father announced tonight that you were being cut from my will because of your career choices. Second, it means he did this publicly, in front of the entire family, as a way to pressure you into abandoning the work you love and joining the family business. I heard my father make a choking sound behind me, but I didn't turn around. Third, my grandfather continued, It means that Orion has just informed everyone that those announcements were premature and based on incomplete information. My grandfather smiled, that familiar warm smile that had always made me feel understood and supported. Harper, I want you to know that every decision I made about my estate was based on watching you grow into exactly the kind of person I hoped you would become. You took the advantages you were born with and used them to create opportunities for people who had far fewer advantages. You built something meaningful from nothing, and you did it without asking for help or expecting recognition. The tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. More importantly, he continued, you did it while maintaining your integrity and your values, even when that meant accepting disappointment and criticism from people whose approval you wanted. He leaned forward slightly, like he was speaking directly to me. I know tonight has been difficult. I know being publicly rejected by your father in front of the entire family was painful and humiliating, but I needed to see how far that rejection would go before I revealed my true wishes. Around the room, I could hear family members shifting uncomfortably, as they realized they'd all been part of some kind of elaborate test. The family business I built was always meant to be a tool for improving communities and creating opportunities for others. Somewhere along the way, it became just another way to accumulate wealth for people who already had more than they needed. His expression grew more serious. You, Harper, have spent the last 5 years proving that you understand the real purpose of wealth. You've shown that you can take limited resources and use them to create lasting positive change. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and vision that I want guiding my company's future. The recording continued for several more minutes, with my grandfather explaining his specific hopes for how I might transform the family business, his pride in the work I'd already accomplished, and his confidence that I would make decisions based on values rather than just profit margins. When the recording ended, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then my father exploded. This is insane, he shouted, pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace. You can't just hand over a $50 million company to someone who's never run anything bigger than a nonprofit program. She'll destroy everything I've spent the last 10 years building. Wilson, my mother said quietly, please lower your voice. Lower my voice. He whirled around to face her. Amelia, do you understand what this means? Everything we've worked for, everything we've planned for, everything we've built our lives around, it's gone, just like that. Tristan stepped forward, his face pale but his voice controlled. Dad, we need to think about this rationally. There has to be some way to contest this, some kind of legal challenge. Stone shook his head. I'm afraid not. The will is ironclad, and Mr. Finch anticipated potential challenges. He spent months working with several independent law firms to ensure that his wishes would be legally unassailable. But what about me? Tristan demanded, his composure finally cracking. I've spent my entire career preparing to take over this company. I've given up other opportunities, made sacrifices, built my whole future around eventually running Ivory Tower Investment Group. Now you're telling me that's all been for nothing. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, for the first time all evening. For years I'd seen him as the golden child, the favored son who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. But now I realized that he'd been trapped by expectations, just as much as I'd been hurt by rejection. He'd built his entire identity around being the heir to the family business. He'd probably never even considered what he might want to do if that option didn't exist. Before I could say anything, other family members started speaking up. My Aunt Margaret stepped forward nervously. Harper dear, I hope you know that we didn't all agree with what your father said earlier. Some of us have always admired your work, even if we didn't always understand it. My Uncle Thomas nodded eagerly. Absolutely, we've always thought you were doing something special with that community program. Very noble work. I almost laughed at how quickly the tone in the room had shifted. 20 minutes ago, these same people had been nodding in agreement when my father announced I was being cut off. Now they were falling over themselves to distance themselves from his decision. Kelvin approached me with a mixture of embarrassment and concern. Harper, I need you to know that I had no idea what your father was planning tonight. If I had known he was going to humiliate you like that, I never would have asked you to come. It's okay, Uncle Kelvin, I said softly. I'm actually glad it happened this way. It's better to know exactly where everyone stands. My father overheard this and spun around to face me again. Where everyone stands, Harper, you can't seriously be considering going through with this. You don't know the first thing about running a real estate investment company. Actually, I said, my voice growing stronger, I know more than you think. I've spent 5 years learning how to manage budgets, coordinate complex projects, work with contractors and vendors, navigate government regulations, and measure the success of development initiatives. I stood up straighter, feeling more confident than I had all evening. The only difference is that my projects were designed to help families find stable housing, rather than to maximize profit margins. But Harper, my mother said, stepping toward me with tears in her eyes, what about our family? What about our relationships? This money, this business, it's going to tear us apart. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering all the years of subtle disappointment, all the conversations where she'd expressed concern about my future security, all the times she'd suggested I should reconsider my career choices. Mom, I said gently, our family was already torn apart. It was torn apart the moment you all decided that my value as a person was determined by how much money I made, and whether I joined the family business. My father made one more desperate attempt. Harper, listen to me. I know I was harsh earlier, but I was just trying to motivate you. I've always wanted what's best for you. We can work together now. I can teach you everything you need to know about running the company. The audacity of it took my breath away. You want to teach me? Dad, 30 minutes ago you announced in front of 50 people that I was a disappointment to the family and that I deserved nothing from grandfather's estate. I was wrong, he said quickly. I see that now. I was protecting what I thought were your grandfather's wishes. But now that I know what he really wanted, of course I want to support you. Now that you know I control 70% of the family's wealth, you mean I corrected him. The room fell silent again as the truth of that statement sank in. I looked around at all these faces, people I'd grown up with, people I'd loved, people whose approval I'd spent years trying to earn. And I realized that none of them were looking at me. They were looking at my inheritance. Even now, even after hearing my grandfather's recorded message about my character and values, even after learning about his specific wishes for the family business, they weren't seeing Harper the person. They were seeing Harper the primary beneficiary. You know what the saddest part is? I said loud enough for everyone to hear. If any of you had ever bothered to ask me about my work, really ask, not just politely tolerate hearing about it, you would have learned that I've been developing exactly the kind of socially responsible business model that grandfather wanted for his company. I turned to face my father directly. If you had ever shown genuine interest in what I was accomplishing, instead of just dismissing it as a phase, we could have been working together all along. I could have been helping you transition the family business toward the kind of community-focused development that grandfather believed in. My father started to respond, but I held up my hand to stop him. But that's not what happened. What happened is that you decided I was worthless because I wasn't making enough money for your standards. You decided my work didn't matter because it didn't contribute to the family's wealth accumulation. And tonight you decided to publicly humiliate me to make sure everyone understood that I didn't deserve to be treated as an equal member of this family. I could see him trying to formulate some kind of response, some way to backtrack or explain away what he'd done. And now, I continued, now that you know I control the family business and most of the family wealth, suddenly you want to work together. Suddenly my work has value. Suddenly I'm worth treating with respect. I shook my head. Do you have any idea how devastating that is? Do you understand what it feels like to realize that your own family only values you when you have something they want? My mother was crying openly now. Harper, please, we love you. We've always loved you. No, I said firmly. You love the idea of who you want me to be. You love the version of me that would make choices you understand and approve of. But you've never loved the actual me. The person who finds fulfillment in helping families build better lives. The person who would rather make a difference than make a fortune. I looked at Stone, who had been standing quietly throughout this entire family drama. Mr. Stone, what exactly are my responsibilities as the primary beneficiary? What am I legally required to do? Miss Wilde, he replied professionally. You have complete discretion over how to manage the estate and the business. You can maintain current operations, restructure the company, sell assets, or even liquidate everything if you choose. The only legal requirement is that certain family members receive the specific monetary bequests outlined in the will. And those bequests, are they conditional on anything? Do family members have to meet certain requirements to receive them? Stone smiled slightly. Actually, yes. Your grandfather specified that family members who demonstrated respect for your career choices and supported your independence would receive their full bequests. Those who attempted to manipulate, coerce, or disrespect you would receive substantially reduced amounts. I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me. These people who had just spent the evening judging my life choices, nodding along when my father cut me off from the family, and then immediately pivoting to try to get back in my good graces, now that they knew I controlled their financial futures. For the first time all evening, I felt truly calm. In that case, I said, I think I need some time to process all of this and decide what I want to do next. I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me. Harper, wait, you can't just walk away from this. We need to discuss how this is going to work. We need to figure out how to move forward as a family. I turned back to look at him one more time. Dad, we stopped being a family the moment you decided that my worth as a person was determined by my bank account balance. Tonight just made that official. And with that, I walked out of Thornfield Estate, leaving behind a room full of relatives who were finally beginning to understand that some things, once broken, cannot be fixed. That was 8 months ago. 8 months since I walked out of Thornfield Estate and left my family to process the reality that everything they thought they knew about my grandfather's wishes, my future, and my place in the family had been completely wrong. In the days immediately following that anniversary party, my phone didn't stop ringing. Family members called constantly, each with their own version of an apology, their own explanation for why they'd supported my father's announcement, and their own suggestions for how we could move forward together, now that the truth was known. My father called 17 times in the first week alone. When I finally answered, his tone had completely changed from the authoritative dismissal I'd heard my entire life to something closer to pleading. Harper, we need to talk, he said. I know I handled things badly at the party, but we're family. We can work through this. I can help you transition into running the company. We can build something together. Dad, I said calmly. 8 months ago, if I had called you and said I wanted to discuss ways to make the family business more socially responsible, what would you have said? There was a long pause. I probably would have told you to focus on your nonprofit work and leave business decisions to people with experience. And if I had suggested that we could use our real estate development projects to create more affordable housing and community resources, another pause. I would have said that wasn't financially viable. And if I had asked you to take a serious look at how our developments affected the families and communities where we built. Silence. Dad, the only reason you want to work with me now is because I control the money. 6 months ago, you thought my ideas were worthless. The ideas haven't changed. Only the power dynamic has changed. Harper, that's not fair. It's completely fair, I interrupted. And it's exactly what grandfather knew would happen. He knew that you'd only respect my perspective if I had financial leverage over you. That conversation, like most of the conversations with family members during those first few weeks, ended with hurt feelings and unresolved tension. But it also helped me clarify what I wanted to do with my inheritance and how I wanted to handle my family relationships moving forward. The first decision I made was about Rosewood Community Center. Instead of leaving my position there to run the family business full-time, I restructured my role to become a part-time consultant, while maintaining my connection to the day-to-day work that had given my life meaning for 5 years. This decision shocked everyone, including Orion Stone and the other lawyers who were helping me navigate my inheritance. They couldn't understand why someone who had just inherited a $50 million business empire would want to keep working at a nonprofit for $45,000 a year. But for me, it was the most important decision I made. The Pathway program, the families we served, the community connections I'd built, that work represented who I was at my core. Inheriting wealth didn't change my values or my sense of purpose. It just gave me more resources to pursue those values effectively. The second decision was about Ivory Tower Investment Group. Rather than trying to learn my father's approach to real estate development, I brought in a team of consultants who specialized in socially responsible business practices and sustainable community development. Together, we spent 3 months analyzing every project the company had in development, every property in our portfolio, and every business practice that had been generating profits for the past decade. What we found was both worse and better than I had expected. Worse, because the company had indeed been prioritizing short-term profits over community impact in ways that had displaced hundreds of families and contributed to housing affordability problems throughout the region. Better, because many of these practices could be changed without significantly reducing profitability, and some socially responsible approaches actually offered better long-term financial returns than the strategies my father had been using. We redesigned the company's entire business model around what we called community wealth building, development projects that created value for existing residents and businesses, rather than displacing them. Instead of buying older apartment buildings and converting them to luxury condos, we started renovating them to provide high-quality affordable housing with resident ownership opportunities. Instead of building shopping centers that competed with local businesses, we created mixed-use developments that provided space for community-owned enterprises and social services. Instead of developing properties in isolation, we started partnering with local organizations, schools and health centers to create integrated community assets. The financial results, 6 months later, have been remarkable. Not only is the company more profitable than it was under my father's management, but we're also generating measurable positive impact in every community where we work. We've helped 340 families transition from rental housing to home ownership. We've created over 500 jobs in companies that pay living wages and offer benefits. We've built or renovated 12 community centers that provide educational, health, and social services to underserved neighborhoods. Most importantly, we've proven that the business model my grandfather envisioned, one that builds wealth while also building stronger communities, is not only possible, but more sustainable and profitable than traditional approaches. My father, when he learned about these changes, was livid. "You're destroying everything I built," he shouted during one of our few phone conversations. "You're turning a serious business into some kind of charity project." "Actually," I replied, "I'm turning it into the kind of business grandfather always wanted it to be." And the financial results speak for themselves. When I sent him our quarterly profit reports, showing revenue increases of 23% and profit margin improvements of 18%, he stopped calling for a while. Tristan's response was more complicated. He reached out about 3 months after the anniversary party, not to apologize exactly, but to ask if there might be a role for him in the restructured company. "I know I reacted badly that night," he said, "and I know you have every reason not to trust me. But I've been thinking about what grandfather said in that recording, about the company losing sight of its original purpose. Maybe I lost sight of it too." I was skeptical at first. Tristan had spent his entire career learning to maximize profits without considering social impact. Could he really change his approach fundamentally? But after several long conversations about his motivations, his goals, and his willingness to learn new ways of thinking about business success, I decided to offer him a position as Director of Community Partnerships, with the explicit understanding that his job was to ensure our projects benefited existing residents, rather than displacing them. It's been a difficult transition for him. Learning to measure success by community impact, rather than just profit margins, has challenged everything he thought he knew about business. But he's been genuinely committed to the process, and he's actually become one of our most effective advocates for community wealth building approaches. "I never realized," he told me recently, "how much more satisfying it is to build something that people actually want in their neighborhood, rather than something that forces them to move somewhere else." The rest of my family's response has been predictable. Those who supported my father's decision to cut me off at the anniversary party have spent months trying to repair their relationships with me, usually through elaborate apologies and suggestions for how we might rebuild family unity. My Aunt Margaret sent flowers every week for 2 months, along with cards expressing how proud she was of my success and how she'd always known I was doing important work. My Uncle Thomas started making donations to Rosewood Community Center and mentioning them in every conversation, as if financial support for my work could make up for years of dismissing it as unimportant. Several cousins have reached out with business proposals, investment opportunities, and suggestions for family partnerships that would allow them to benefit from my inheritance while contributing their own expertise. All of these gestures feel hollow, because they're motivated by my financial status rather than genuine understanding of who I am or what I value. The family members who have maintained authentic relationships with me are the ones who supported my choices before they knew about my inheritance. Kelvin and Natalie have remained genuinely interested in my work and proud of what I've accomplished, just as they were before that anniversary party. My cousin Sarah, who works as a teacher and has always understood the value of public service work, has become one of my closest confidants as I've navigated these major life changes. But the relationships that were based on conditional acceptance, love that depended on my conforming to family expectations, those relationships remain broken, and I've come to accept that they probably can't be repaired. My mother continues to call regularly, but our conversations are stilted and uncomfortable. She wants to rebuild our relationship, but she's never acknowledged how hurtful it was to spend years suggesting that my career choices were mistakes that I'd eventually need to correct. She wants me to forgive and forget, without taking responsibility for the years of subtle but constant pressure to change who I was to fit what the family wanted me to be. "I just want my daughter back," she said during our most recent conversation. "Mom," I replied, "I'm the same person I've always been. The only thing that's changed is that now you know I don't need your approval to be financially secure." "That's not true," she protested. "We've always been proud of you. You've always loved me," I corrected her. "But you haven't been proud of my choices until you found out they came with a $50 million inheritance." These conversations are painful, but they're also clarifying. They help me understand the difference between relationships based on genuine acceptance and relationships based on the hope that someone will eventually become who you want them to be. Looking back on everything that's happened, I feel a complex mix of grief and relief. Grief because losing my family relationships, even toxic ones, has been genuinely painful. There are moments when I miss the illusion of belonging, the comfort of family traditions, and the hope that someday they would truly understand and accept my choices. Relief because I no longer have to pretend that conditional love is better than no love at all. I no longer have to minimize my accomplishments to make other people comfortable. I no longer have to defend my values or justify my choices to people who were never going to respect them anyway. Most importantly, I no longer have to carry the exhausting burden of trying to earn approval from people who had decided that my worth was determined by criteria I would never meet. The work I'm doing now, both at Rosewood Community Center and with the restructured family business, feels more authentic and fulfilling than anything I've ever done. I get to pursue my passion for community development with resources I never could have imagined having access to. I get to prove every day that business success and social responsibility aren't contradictory goals. I get to build something that honors my grandfather's values while creating opportunities for families who need them most. 6 months ago, we launched a new initiative called the Pathway Partnership, which combines the community development work I was doing at Rosewood with the real estate development resources of Ivory Tower Investment Group. Families who complete our job training and financial literacy programs can apply for home ownership opportunities in our residential developments, with down payment assistance and ongoing support to ensure their long-term success. We've already helped 89 families purchase their first homes, and we have a waiting list of over 200 families who are working through our preparation programs. This integration of nonprofit services and business development is exactly what my grandfather envisioned when he decided to leave me his company. It's the kind of work that uses wealth strategically to create more wealth and opportunity for people who need both. But beyond the professional satisfaction, I've also found a different kind of family. The team of people I work with, both at Rosewood and at the restructured investment company, have become a chosen family based on shared values and mutual respect. We celebrate each other's successes, support each other through challenges, and build together toward goals that matter to all of us. Jennifer Martinez, my colleague from Rosewood, often reminds me that family isn't just about blood relationships. Family, she says, is about people who see you clearly, support your growth, and celebrate your authentic self. By that definition, I have a wonderful family. It just doesn't include most of the people who share my last name. As I've reflected on everything that's happened, I keep coming back to a question that I think many people struggle with. How do you maintain relationships with people who love you but don't respect you? For years I tried to make that work. I accepted criticism and dismissal from my family because I believed that family love was supposed to be unconditional, and that meant tolerating their disapproval of my choices. But I've learned that truly unconditional love includes respecting someone's right to make decisions that are different from what you would choose for them. Love that requires someone to change fundamental aspects of who they are isn't unconditional. It's conditional on conformity. The night of that anniversary party, when my father announced that I was being cut from my grandfather's will, he was making explicit what had always been implicit, that my place in the family was conditional on making choices they approved of. When the truth about my inheritance was revealed, and they suddenly wanted to rebuild our relationships, they were proving that their acceptance of me was based on what I could do for them, not on who I was as a person. I don't regret walking away from that dynamic. I don't regret choosing my values over their approval. I don't regret prioritizing my own peace and authenticity over maintaining family harmony at the cost of my self-respect. Some people might say I was too harsh, that I should have given my family more time to adjust, that I should have been more forgiving of their mistakes. But I think there's a difference between forgiveness and allowing yourself to be disrespected repeatedly. I can forgive my family for their limited understanding of my choices, without accepting ongoing criticism and manipulation. I can understand that their treatment of me was based on their own fears and insecurities, without allowing those fears to determine how I live my life. Most importantly, I can love them from a distance, without subjecting myself to relationships that consistently make me feel bad about who I am. If you're listening to this story, and you recognize elements of your own family dynamics, I want you to know that you have the right to set boundaries that protect your peace and your authenticity. You have the right to pursue work that fulfills you, even if your family doesn't understand it. You have the right to be loved for who you are, not who someone else wants you to become. You have the right to walk away from relationships that consistently make you feel small, inadequate, or wrong for being yourself. Setting those boundaries doesn't make you ungrateful, disloyal, or cold. It makes you someone who values yourself enough to insist on respectful treatment. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their disrespectful behavior by removing yourself from situations where that behavior is tolerated or encouraged. I don't know if my relationship with my family will ever be repaired. I don't know if they'll ever truly understand why their conditional acceptance was so hurtful. I don't know if they'll ever be able to see me as a whole person, rather than as a disappointment who happened to inherit money. But I know that I'm at peace with the decisions I've made. I know that my life has meaning and purpose that doesn't depend on their approval. I know that I'm building something valuable with my inheritance, my skills, and my commitment to social justice. And I know that real family, the kind that matters, isn't determined by genetics or legal documents. It's determined by love, respect, and mutual support for each other's authentic selves. So coming back to the question I asked at the beginning of this story, was I wrong for exposing my father's lies and claiming what was rightfully mine, even if it destroyed our family forever? I don't think it destroyed our family. I think it revealed that our family had been built on a foundation that couldn't support genuine love and respect. I think my grandfather, in his wisdom, created a situation that would force all of us to confront the difference between conditional and unconditional acceptance. And I think I made the right choice by choosing my authentic self over their approval, my values over their expectations, and my peace over their comfort. If you're facing a similar choice, I hope you'll choose yourself too, because in the end, the only approval that really matters is your own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.